Hi everyone, good afternoon. This is the presentation of our research, Linguistic Competence in Higher Education, a philosophy of language perspective, presented by Juan Javier Ramírez Valles and Otoniel Serrano de Santiago, from Licenciatura en Lenguas Extranjeras of the Universidad Autónoma de Zacatecas. So let's begin. Introduction. LILEX, Licenciatura en Lenguas Extranjeras, has three outcome specialties: teaching, translation, and international relations, and linguistics as a common ground. Spanish, L2, English, and L3, French, German, or Italian are mandatory subjects. Linguistics is part of the curriculum from first up to 7th semester. In last semester, students take as a mandatory subject philosophy of language. Okay, so before we start with the philosophy of language branches, we need to focus on what philosophy of language investigates. Okay, so it researches the nature of language, the relations between language users, and the world. Okay, so I think this brief explanation will be helpful to understand the next steps in our research. Okay, so let's go on with what philosophy of language comprises. The nature of meaning, semantics, what is meant to mean. Semantics correspond to language. It comprehends the signifier of the signified. Signified is the plane of content, the concept, in brief words, while signifier is the plane of expression, what we conceive as the mental representation of an object. Therefore, it conveys what societies perceive of the environment. It represents the inherent connection between subject and object. Then we have language use, pragmatics, how language is affected by the situation. Well, in languages we have certain expressions that do not mean what they appear to mean or what they really mean. For example, an action speaks louder than words. This does not mean that an action could speak as you and me. As you may know, this is a metaphorical inference referring to not believe in promises or false assumptions. What word is to make that promise really happen. The next is language cognition, language and thought. It is how people depict the images of their surroundings in their minds. However, those representations might be affected by their life experiences. For instance, when we hear Chucky, perhaps we, at least the old people as me, could think about the 90s thriller Child's Play Assassin Puppet. On the other hand, young people or soccer fans may think in the soccer player Irving El Chucky Lozano. Finally, the relation between language and reality. Truth conditions. The meaning of a sentence is its criterion of truth. Well, this is a quite interesting appreciation. For instance, if I say this sentence is false, then it is false. But if it's false, then it is not false, or is it still false? It is still false. Well, and this is a never-ending paradox, but however, it is just about conceptions, about what is real and what is truth. Okay, so it's time to talk about linguistic competence. Linguistic competence is the ability of the language user to create well-formed sentences, taking into account the innate grammatic rules to do so. Language is ordered into a system of rules. Pragmatics and semantics have been already explained. Syntax comprehends the structure of a sentence. Morphology is the construction of the words, while phonology is the classification of the sounds within the system of a particular language or languages. And finally, phonetics, that is about how human sounds are articulated. Okay, so linguistic competence leads us to the next topic, that is communicative competence. Communicative competence is the user's ability not only to transmit a meaningful message, but also the good messages others are sending to him. This is when speakers depict what their perceptions truly are. Okay, so here we have our background. Cagrit-Wool in 2017 says that language is an object of learning. In light of this viewpoint, learners have a necessity of engaging in communicative language tasks. Chirino Pérez, en 2019, el avance de la capacidad abierta infiere un contacto individual que además se suma a la mejora y a la articulación y avance en el nombre de cada uno de sus resultados potenciales. Gibbs, in 2003, meaning is not simply reduced to a purely hypothetical construct that must be studied from a formal objectivist perspective. Rico Martín, in 2016, carencias lingüístico-discursivas del alumnado, se han observado errores que deberían haberse subsanado en etapas educativas anteriores, sobre todo en la de primaria. Margariños, in 2020, gran parte de los problemas que afectan el estudio semiótico de las imágenes visuales se origina en la pretensión de dar cuenta de su variedad desde un único punto de vista. Here we have the objective of our research, that is to analyze if students are capable of making linguistic and philosophical inferences about a hypothetical situation that promotes a critical viewpoint of them.
On the theoretical framework section, first we have Chomsky. He suggests that language is an innate faculty. That is, that we are born with a set of rules about language in our minds, which he refers to as universal grammar. This means that children are equipped since they are born with this language acquisition device, and that most languages share the subject, verb, and object structure. But there's a statement that it's very important for linguistics and philosophy of language. Although the language device might be innate, there is a need for people to socialize. So language is acquired through the interaction with the environment. Meaning that we have an interaction, mind, environment, and language as well. In counterpart, Ludwig Wittgenstein expresses that to understand the meaning of meaning, you ought also to understand the meaning of the explanation of meaning. So this leads us to a question. What does it mean to mean? Whenever we want to explain, whenever we want to define, whenever we want to share information about something, we need to define what characteristics or what are we going to express about something, about an object in the world. So this is very important to take into account, because this is how we construct identity on objects, people, situations. In this regard, the method to reveal the linguistic competence would be qualitative, with a descriptive characteristic. The way of analyzing the written language would be by categorization. The instrument intended to be used in order to reveal the linguistic competence will be a questionnaire. These questions have to do with the world, mind, and language in order to integrate different elements that are related to language philosophy. And up to now, the question that has been answered by the participants is, how do people with protanopia understand the word red? The participants were advanced English students. According to the latter, results are being processed. So here we present partial results. The image represents an example of how the analysis and categorization is being held. We have the philosophical inference identified, we have the semantic inference, and we have the pragmatic inference. First, just remember from the previous information given that semantics is the study of the meaning of words, phrases, and sentences. So most of them in a literal way. So this is how we establish the meaning for signs or set of signs. This will be language. And in some situations, these have to do with a connotative meaning. Consider the following examples. Today is your last day as a single woman, or today is your first day as a married woman. We might think that these sentences mean the same thing. You know, they mean the same idea. They stand for the same situation. But if we analyze, especially if we take into consideration connotation, there's a difference between them. Whenever we're talking about last day, we're talking about the end of something. And in the other hand, whenever we are talking about the first day as a married woman, we're talking about the beginning of something. Now, if we consider the pragmatic inference, whenever we talk about language, well, just for us to remember, pragmatics has to do with how language is understood or is orientated towards a meaning based on the context. So it's context linked. So whenever we talk about pragmatics, then we're talking about specifically about how people construct a meaning for a specific word, phrase, or sentence within a context. Well, observing this image, we will finally consider philosophy, philosophical inference. But whenever talking about philosophy of language, we have to think about mental experiments. This is the way that philosophy of language works. This will be an imagination resource that it's used to provide insight on the nature of things. This will be that we imagine hypothetical situations in order to solve what happens in real life, or in this case, what happens on human interaction, what happens whenever we communicate, and how we use language in different ways. So this will be the philosophical aspect of the research. So, well, having this as a base in order to understand how the analysis and categorization has been done here, we can read on this response given by a student. In fact, a colorblind person can understand the word red. That will be a philosophical inference. That has to do with a mental experiment. It's a hypothetical. It's something that hasn't happened. It's something that is just thought, or it was just mentally orientated by whoever thought about it. Now we have this other part of the text. As long as this person is involved in an environment with people where people explain meanings to them or where they can easily grasp. We're talking about pragmatic inference because this has to do with context, what people thinks in a specific situation, in a specific setting. So here we're talking about pragmatics. Now consider the phrase, we would use big words such as war and death. Here we're talking about semantics because these words represent something in the real world. They represent ideas. Although we might have lived differently, war and death, we have an idea of what they represent and how they work or how we can place them whenever we speak or whenever we write or whenever we communicate. Considering the previous explanations about how the analysis is going to be held for the rest of the writings provided by the students, the categorization will be divided into three: philosophical inference, semantic inference, and pragmatic inference. The previous explanation and this example shows how the rest of the texts provided by students will be analyzed. Categorization will be organized by philosophical, semantic, and pragmatic inference. So, up to this point, we cannot provide conclusions. However, it is important to consider some philosophy of language based ideas. Specifically, whenever we communicate or whenever we're involved in some speech acts, whichever these are, written, oral, or gestures, mimicry, um, people tend to think that whenever we try or whenever we intend to communicate something, all people must understand and they would imply what the idea or what the message is. And as we can observe on the previous example or on the first analysis of this processed information, it is not always true. Finally, you will find the references that are base for the development of this study. It is important to mention that the study is in process. Thank you.